Welcome to Lawyer and Layman Explain It. This is a show where we discuss topics related to law and social justice from the perspective of a layperson who is struggling to grasp the reality of what's going on in the world, and
someone who has briefly gotten to wear a federal judge's robe. And let me tell you, that thing is heavy. Before we dive into our episode, quick disclaimer. This podcast is for educational purposes only, and it's not intended to provide any legal advice. If you need legal advice, you might want to pause the podcast and find a lawyer.
But then come back. Please come back.
Any inaccuracies are unintentional, and facts could change at any time. Do your own research. All right, so we're very excited for today's topic, but first we wanted to acknowledge our absence in the past month and some change, maybe approaching 2 months. So we started out strong, right? We put out our first 10 episodes, and then we kind of just ghosted, and maybe that's what it feels like. And I don't know, for those who have had any experience or spent any time on Tinder or Hinge, it's like, you know, the connection, we mutually swiped, we exchanged some messages, couple dates, everything was going great. And then the ghosting, which I know a lot of people out there can relate to, but that's a digression. Anyway, what happened was, well, Martin, what are your thoughts on our hiatus?
I wanted to make some joke about swiping, but thank God I avoided the dating app trend and I met my beautiful wife and now podcast co-host. So I don't know if the joke would have hit anyway. But yeah, our hiatus, there has been a lot going on, both in just the world at large, within the legal community and with law. But then also in our personal lives, there's been a lot going on.
And yes, that's right. We each took a certification examination and passed. Yay. Ooh. And we had family stuff going on. Oh, and we took a vacation to Hawaii. And also in between all of that, we were processing this whole 47 presidency thing. So yes, there has been a lot to process and lots of things going on. And we've been talking about how to address the very difficult reality of what's happening, while also not having you all feel like we're living in a doom and gloom space, because there's always a reason to be hopeful. So today's episode is meant to inspire some hope. And Martin, are you ready to get into it?
I am.
Great. So what do you know about the federal litigation that's happening across the country to challenge many of these egregious executive orders?
Oh boy, that is a very loaded question. Let me start off by saying I'm glad that we are looking to provide reasons to be hopeful, because I know I need it. I think many of us do need it. And then referring to the federal litigation with the executive orders. Oh God, where do I begin? I don't know that we have enough time. As per usual, I could go on a rant about this, but since the election, I've definitely tried to detox from social media, particular social medias specifically. And of course, it's been unavoidable, and I've slid back into tuning in and binging on the news a little bit. So yeah, I mean, it's hard to say how much I know because it seems like it's just a flurry of chaos. But I am glad that we are going to be taking a deeper dive today on the litigation in the federal courts and kind of response to executive orders, I believe, is what we're talking about.
Yes, that's right. And today we're actually just going to talk about only one of the judges that's been pointing out aspects of executive orders that are possibly / likely unconstitutional and that violate the rule of law. That's the bedrock of our democracy, the rule of law, and hence this episode being titled, The Judge That Said Nah. It's not just this judge, though, that is of interest, and there's more judges and more cases that are relevant, but given that we want to keep the podcast episodes fairly short, we're only going to take a deep dive on one judge in one case today. And we'll also link to some more examples if you're curious. And let me just quickly emphasize a part of the disclaimer at the beginning of the episode, the part where I say facts could change anytime. There's a reason I include that, people. Things are happening at a very rapid pace, so by the time you hear this, the status of even this case might have changed. We'll do our best to keep you updated, either with new episodes or on social media. And I also want to tell Martin that, I'm going to be doing a lot of explaining and kind of talking through the case and stuff, so please stop me if something is confusing or if I'm rambling or if you can think of a music reference because I forgot to include one in my outline. So, yes. Is that cool?
Yes. And I was trying to think of a music reference right there so we could check that off, but I got nothing.
Just let it come to you.
Yes, it'll come. It'll come. I did want to say that in my backsliding and onto social media, I have seen this reference a lot that no one is here, no one is coming to save us, right? And there have been so many times, I think even in our conversations, where I've ranted and raved, like, where is the cavalry? Like, aren't there mechanisms in place to stop all of this chaos? Like, is there no one out there who wants to do the work and maybe not save us? But yeah, please save us, somebody. So it's cool that we're going to be talking about some people who maybe they're not here to save us. And in fact, I think it still applies that no one is going to come and save us, but there is an us and there are other people who are seeing the things that we're seeing. And the wheels of justice move slowly.
But they move. And Martin raises some really great points. And the reason we created this podcast is to provide information and to help our audience understand various legal topics and things that are happening in society so that you can feel part of a more informed body. And as Martin was speaking to, and so you can feel like you're all part of this work, we're all part of this work that has to be done to keep our democracy intact. That's exactly why we're talking about today's topic, why we're explaining to you this case today. Today we're very excited to talk about a judge who's also taking their duty very seriously. At the beginning of the episode, I mentioned putting on a black robe, and it is physically heavy. I mean, the material is thick, but the weight of putting on that robe, it's not just the physical sort of material. It's when you think about someone having a lifetime appointment as a federal judge, and it's intended that they take the position and the role very seriously. And some people, they just go about the role. It happens to be something that they wanted to check off. They're not here for us. But then there's other people that do take the role very seriously, and we're going to talk about one of those people. We'll start out by giving our audience a summary of the litigation that we'll be focusing on. And because I'm always impressed with what Martin already knows, before I get to my lawyer details, I'm going to ask Martin the following question. Do you know anything specifically about the case pending in a federal court in Rhode Island that's been brought by some states against the president and other agency leaders?
Not really. But I do know that there is some federal litigation against the executive order that paused the U.S. aid funding. Is that what we're talking about?
You're getting warm.
And then there's also some litigation. I think some other cases are actually finally making it through the legal system. But there's also some cases about the unauthorized firing of large swaths of federal employees, of lifelong public servants.
You're getting warm. There is some litigation in that area, and I think some other cases are finally kind of making it through the legal system. There's multiple challenges that are happening, so it's kind of hard to piece through and kind of keep track in some instances. And yes, there's also some cases about what plaintiffs are alleging unauthorized firing of large swaths of federal employees, of lifelong public servants. So yes, you're right. Those are the topics of some pending cases, and we are going to share more details about those cases in the document that's linked in our show notes, in our reference document. We're not going to be talking about those cases and those executive orders, but you're pointing out the fact that there's just so many of these popping up. And that there are people that are out there on the front lines that are challenging these things. So I love that you are aware of those. And I love that this is a topic, that we could probably continue to talk about. We can decide if we want to do more than one episode on.
That question was pretty general. And I think I've seen it theorized that that's also part of the plan, is that they're throwing so much stuff out there. They're just flooding the space that to mount, a legal response, you have to pick and narrow your focus and focus your energies in one place, so that, there's a lot of other stuff that's going to slip through the cracks. But yeah, there's a lot going on. So why don't we get into it?
So yeah, we'll get into it. And I do want to acknowledge that, we're in a space where one side has essentially unlimited access to resources. So that makes it hard. I won't lie. And it does feel like it's not a fair fight. So you are absolutely right that not everything can be litigated. Not everything will be litigated. And not all of the cases that we think are valid will even prevail in the courts. But we're going to see. And there's people and organizations and causes that are out there. They're filing these complaints. They're starting these cases. And we'll see what happens, because there's also judges who care and who take their responsibilities very seriously. That's just sort of a side note, but I just feel so passionately about this topic. But Martin, let me ask, what do you know about Rhode Island? Have you ever been there before?
I've never been there before. It's a small state on the East Coast. And that's all that I really know. I feel like it's very quintessentially Northeast U.S. And side note, the closest I've ever been, I think, was when we were in New Jersey when we met at a wedding.
That's probably also the closest I've been. I've also not been to Rhode Island, despite living on the East Coast for a number of years. That is a state I unfortunately did not get a chance to visit. And I also don't know much about it. I do know that there's a place called Providence there that may or may not be the capital. Please, people from Rhode Island, don't come for me, okay? It's not that I didn't want to know, okay? I grew up on the West Coast.
West Coast, best coast.
True. So, before I get way far down the wormhole, do you have any ideas why a case against the president and friends would end up in a Rhode Island federal court?
Short answer, no, because I don't really know how the federal court system works that well. And I don't know what case we're talking about either. And it's still escaped my grasp what exactly we're talking about. So no.
Yes. And I got you, because there's this thing called the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. And those are the rules that are used in federal court to sort of manage the logistics of civil litigation. Essentially, so things like how to file a case, what you need to include in the complaint, how you get the complaint to the person that you're suing, how to file a motion, etc. That's covered by the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. And what's also covered in the Rules of Civil Procedure is how to handle where cases that involve multiple states should be tried. So this case involves multiple states coming together to sue the president and other members of the executive branch. And so there are rules for how cases get assigned to places. And often it's through a randomization process. And that helps people feel more comfortable that cases were not just picked and chosen, although there is picking and choosing that does happen sometimes in litigation. We might spend more time on civil procedure, affectionately known by people in law school as Civ Pro. We might spend some more time on that topic in another episode. But for now, Martin, can you read this language from a Providence, Rhode Island online newspaper?
Rhode Island Attorney General Peter Nahh said it was a collective decision among the 6 lead states on the lawsuit. Basically, when there is a multi-state lawsuit, states will bind together and choose a state in which to file jointly. In this case, Rhode Island was one of the 6 states that co-led the suit, and the lead states decided to file there. Timothy Rondeau, spokesman for the office, said.
And this person, or I suppose these two people, are mentioned as they describe the process for how the states came together in this case to decide where to file. There's still an official process that happens, right? So in this instance, they came together and chose the state where they wanted to file, but they followed an official process because there is a process for making such a request. And there's challenges that can be made. We're not going to dive into how exactly that all works, but just want folks to know the reason why we're talking about a court in Rhode Island. But let's get to the meat and potatoes of the matter, because that's what we're all really here for. So there's a case, and I read the judge's most recent order and some news coverage to prepare for today. And here's what I have. I'm going to start from the beginning, Martin, so that you and others listening who haven't heard of this case are aware of what's happening.
Let's get after it.
Let's get after it. Let's get locked in, as my nephew says. Okay, so after being in office barely more than a week, 47 issued a number of executive orders telling federal agencies to stop funding certain activities, mostly related to immigration, DEI, and gender-affirming healthcare, among other areas. And as an aside, for those who are not sure what an executive order is, the ABA has a helpful definition, and that is, an executive order is a signed and published directive from the President of the United States that manages operations of the federal government. We will link to the article where this definition can be found, and we will probably spend more time on executive orders in another episode, or maybe several episodes. And shout out to the awesome listener that reached out to us asking for more information about executive orders. We heard you, and we want to bring you that information. We are definitely going to try. First, Martin, is that definition of what an executive order is helpful to you as our resident layman?
Yeah, I mean, I think that gives the general idea from my understanding of what an executive order is. I think, yeah, we probably could spend a whole episode or series of episodes talking about it, and the mechanisms by which it works and the legalities surrounding it. But I just wanted to note, the first thing that comes to mind is I believe that there was a president not that long ago who one side complained was filing all these executive orders and, you know, breaking all these long-standing norms, and God forbid the executive exercise this or overutilize this mechanism, I guess.
Yeah, I guess that's a complaint that is as old as time, quite frankly, because one president does something and signs some executive orders, and then the other president comes next and wants to undo those executive orders. We've seen that happen before. But now you have a bit of background on what an executive order is. And in this instance, the executive order that's at the heart of the case that we're discussing, it also then was followed by an agency called the Office of Management and Budget, who, as you can tell from their name, helps the president execute his duties, including managing federal spending. That agency issued a memo telling the other agencies to freeze spending in the areas that 47 specified in the executive order, and to submit information about their activities to the agency, OMB, for review. And Martin, just so you know, the words woke gender ideology were used in this memo that apparently a grown and professional adult, maybe multiple adults, wrote.
Oh, God.
Bruh.
Yeah. We could spend an episode just talking about some of this stuff, but I don't know if that really fits within the lawyer and layman umbrella. But where do I even start with it? Supposedly grown professional adults using this language that I think a middle schooler should be chastised for using such language. But again, to cut things short, the first thing that comes to mind is I would love to ask these folks, define woke.
Right.
And within that, like I've tried to take back woke. Like I have tried to use it, because what's wrong with being awake to what the reality of the world is? Would you rather people be sleepwalking, plugged into the matrix, just doing what what they've always done? Or would you like to be awoke? Would you like to be conscious to what the reality of the situation is? There's a million different ways that it is dumb.
Full disclosure, I did not read said memo because I knew it would upset me. But I don't know about you, but these 3 words tell me a lot about the contents of the memo. Listeners, I mean, truly, we could spend an entire episode just talking about the issues raised here in this memo and sort of the positioning that is coming out of OMB. But not where we're going to focus our time today. Although, I mean, where does one even begin? Like, grown professional adults using this language. I tend to agree with Martin's point here. And yes. Yeah, I can't even hear that word anymore. I mean, it's just been so co-opted by a certain type of lady with a certain type of haircut. And it's just like, it's been so diluted that I'm like, y'all just sound wild. Like, does this word even mean anything anymore? It's also, I mean, it's an OMB memo of all places. Like, these are supposed to be the driest, most official memos that are just talking about how money should be spent, or, well, we'll get to why that could be a problem. But they're talking about why the executive should take a certain action, or why agency should follow a certain direction. Like, what are we doing with woke gender ideology? But anyway.
Yeah, that's crazy. And then it's just the latest flavor of the month, yes. Right? Is woke. It's DEI. It was affirmative action. It was critical race theory. Like, what happened to that?
Yes. So, in this memo, there were a number of issues raised, and so 22 states and the District of Columbia saw the memo and were like, absolutely not. And so they banded together and filed a lawsuit against the president and other federal officials, claiming that OMB's memo and 47's executive order prompting the memo violated several laws in various parts of the Constitution. So they asked for a temporary restraining order. They made that request in the complaint that instituted the case. In their request for a temporary restraining order, they wanted to essentially force the defendants, and then, reminder, the defendants in this case are the president and other federal government officials. The request was to have these people stop any activities related to the memo until the case could be decided.
Maybe I'm jumping ahead, and I thought about this when you kind of introduced OMB and their role with the executive, but we'll probably get into this. Within the Constitution, the purse is controlled by Congress. Like, it is very clearly and plainly stated. In fact, I remember seeing some comments by one of my favorite Congress people, like one of a handful that I believe is truly there to help all of us. Jamie Raskin, he was criticizing this phrase of co-equal branches of government because, first of all, co-equal is redundant. And on top of that, the 3 branches are not co-equal. They have their lanes. And the budget and the purse and funding is in Congress's lane. But anyway, I could tell by your nodding. I'm probably getting ahead of myself in the episode.
Once again, I want to commend Martin for his awareness.
Oh, stop. I'm cutting this out.
Don't cut it. Don't cut it.
Much like the 3 branches of government have their lanes, my lane is editing. So I'm going to cut out whatever I want.
Well done. And I mean, in all seriousness, I think your awareness of just on its face how problematic this is, that a member of the executive whose job is not to be handling money is trying to handle how money is spent. You pointed it out, and we've just kind of gotten into the beginning of the facts. So yes, you're very much in the direction of the judge that issued this order. But let's talk more about this, because there's some behaviors and actions that led up to the order that I read that I think are really interesting. But before we sort of continue sharing details about the case, I want to spend some time on what it is that the plaintiffs in this case are asking for. I mentioned that they're asking for a temporary restraining order, and I want to make an aside to break down what that means in this context. Martin, are you aware of how restraining orders work? And I'm guessing that you and people who watch TV or maybe who know people that may have been harmed are aware of at least one context where these might be used.
Yeah, I think, side note, or to reach for my candy. As Kasey mentioned, part of our hiatus, we took a vacation to Hawaii on the island of Kauai. And so I have my Lihing generic sour kids. I'm already digging into them.
Sour, ...
Kids. No idea what those could be. Sorry, back to the topic at hand. Restraining order. I think often you think of an abusive boyfriend. But I think if I recall back to whatever I learned in school and whatever class, I think a restraining order is like one of two types of results of the course that like a judge can enforce. And there's like, I'm trying to think, because this would be civil court, because there's criminal and there's civil. And so this would be a civil lawsuit. And within civil lawsuits, you can or the judge can, or the results of the court case can award monetary rewards or punishments. And the other is restraining order, which like legally binds somebody from stopping a certain action.
Very well done. See, man, I keep telling y'all don't even need me.
Yeah, right.
Yes. So, I mean, I'm just constantly impressed with what Martin knows. Do y'all even need the lawyer part of lawyer and layman? Anyway, so very well done. There are multiple forms of relief in a litigation. So, in relief is sort of what you want to get out of filing the case. There are multiple forms of that, and Martin pointed out that you can seek or request money, which is also known as damages, or you can seek something that falls in the category of an injunction. That is a temporary restraining order, falls into that category. There's also a third type, which is something called a declaratory judgment, and those are less well known, I think, in the popular context. Often they're asking the court to make a certain statement or take a certain position. And, you know, to give an example, someone wants to have a judgment that says my brand means this, or I have this patent or something else. It's a statement that is legally binding, that if a court said it, that means it's pretty serious. We're not going to dive any deeper than that, but we are going to focus on the injunction piece. As Martin pointed out, a restraining order is a type of injunction, and injunctions are essentially asking the court to tell someone to either do or stop doing something. And so a temporary injunction or a temporary restraining order is asking the defendant to do or stop doing until the court can sort everything out and determine who's going to win. And then a permanent injunction is to do or stop doing, period, point blank, because the law requires the action to be done or not done. And if you're wondering when were injunctions used, other than them being requested in the case at hand, injunctions were common tools in the civil rights area, particularly to integrate schools or to allow Black people to use pools or enter other spaces. And as you can guess, they're often not followed and exist only on paper, much like the restraining orders that you're familiar with in the domestic violence context and many other domains. But I mean, they still have a legal effect, and sometimes people listen to them. Martin, is it helpful to have that explanation and background as to what restraining orders and injunctions are? And I do know that I'm doing a lot of asides, but I want our audience to understand the legal jargon because it's not always explained in the news.
Yes, I do believe that was helpful, and thank you for further detailing exactly what some of these things mean. When you use the word judgment, all I could hear, I'm trying to get my music reference in, was Tupac's "Only God Can Judge Me," the little chorus for that one. The other music reference that I'm trying to wedge in here was INGUNCTION. Yep.
Know what that means, man?
Exactly. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad that you got that. And then yeah, I mean, to your point, just like I think we're finding out, a lot of the laws and norms are just written on a piece of paper, and there is a mechanism by which they have been upheld, but our laws and our legal system is really fully reliant on those mechanisms. Like, you could pass a law, but is it going to be enforced? Is it going to be applied? Like, is it, yeah, all of those questions. And then that being said, from my understanding too, with both the layman idea of a restraining order, you know, like an abusive boyfriend or something like that, you put it on paper, and yeah, it's not going to stop from that abusive boyfriend from showing up and harming the person who the restraining order is to protect. But I think it builds a case, right? Like, isn't that kind of just like an example of, hey, they violated a restraining order, and then next time they can do more than just a restraining order, and or maybe there's criminal charges pressed, or it maybe it doesn't have this specific mechanism, but it sets up a mechanism further down the road potentially.
And I just want to acknowledge that there's many people who've requested help from the court, and then the court puts in place a restraining order. And then the reaction is, what am I supposed to do? Throw the paper at them? How am I supposed to keep myself safe? Mm-hmm. And those are very valid questions. That's a very valid reaction to wanting something to happen that maybe if your concern is that someone's harming you, a piece of paper doesn't feel like it's going to stop that. And you know, legal relief is not always perfect. And that's the same with money damages, right? If somebody sues a company because their loved one passed away due to a harmful chemical or a defective vehicle or something along those lines, you know, money maybe will help with funeral costs and other life expenses, but it's not going to bring the person back. So court and litigation forms of relief are not perfect, but you're right. They are sometimes intended to help escalate a process. And they're sometimes meant to put something on the books that then helps other people later.
I think that also kind of highlights a practice that I have enacted over the last few years. I think as we've kind of been exposed to what goes on in the courts, is I really avoid saying the justice system or using the word justice, because like some of the stuff is not justice. So it's a legal system to me. And I think that's a more accurate description of what goes on, is that they're laws, and there's things that we as a society determine are legal and illegal. But justice, I think, is something that often escapes, the courts.
I think that's a really good point. And in many of the cases that we've already talked about, you know, we talked about voting rights, and in some of our earlier episodes, the topics that we covered, it feels as though there's inherent unfairness sometimes, depending maybe where you are, depending which side has money and which side doesn't have resources. So I hear that. I do. And I still grapple with wanting to believe that the system of laws does need to be here and can make a difference, but it's imperfect. I got to give you that. So, back to our case. The 22 states, including Oregon, woohoo, and also the state that I, of course, go hard for, rep for, Washington State, woohoo, plus DC, ask for a temporary restraining order, TRO. And as we explained, the TRO is a request to ask, in this case, the defendants to stop doing something. And the judge set a hearing. But then OMB rescinds their memo and argues that the plaintiff's case is now moot, and that means the case shouldn't exist and should be dismissed because, in their view, there's no basis for the claim. Basically, just poof, case is gone. That's what the argument was. But then the White House press secretary tweets that the funding freeze is not actually rescinded and the executive orders stand. So, head scratcher, very confusing. And the judge, after all this, was like, bruh, how are you going to issue a memo, then rescind the memo, then say the memo had no impact, but then say the purpose of the memo still exists? Y'all need to stop. This is some foolishness. We're having this hearing. I have no idea if this man in Rhode Island said or thought that. This is simply my imagination speaking. Y'all know I like to get colorful in here. Martin, are you following, or is this confusing and chaotic, which, by the way, appears to be the signature of this administration?
Absolutely is the signature of this administration in pretty much everything they do, talking out of both sides of their mouth. Just, it seems like the chaos is the point, so they can be like, hey, shiny object over here. And I mean, I assume, there's some other business going on, but I mean, it seems like that is the ploy, right? But yeah, no, because you are doing a great job explaining. Yeah, I'm following so far.
Great. Okay, let's march on. So, after having a hearing and reviewing the evidence presented by both sides, the judge ultimately determined that the rescission of the memo was, quote unquote, in name only, and that this executive branch has every intention to pause funding in the areas specified by 47's executive orders. Judge McConnell then granted the request for TRO on January 31st. But we're here because something recent happened, and there's more. There were more motions filed in the case because the states claimed they were still not receiving funding, despite the fact that a federal judge ordered the funding freeze to be halted. On March 6th, Judge McConnell granted a motion for a preliminary injunction. And think of this as sort of one step higher in the ladder, or one step more formal or serious than asking for a TRO. We will share a link to Judge McConnell's order. And I gotta say, the judge drops absolute bars in his order. And I want to get into those. But first, Martin, any reactions to the fact that the states were not getting funding, despite the judge saying stop until we sort all this out?
I feel like this is exactly what we were just talking about. Like, there are these laws that are put in place, but it's nothing but a piece of paper or writing somewhere until there's a mechanism that enforces what is put in place. And then, yeah, I mean, this is exactly that I've heard it as a debate technique is gish galop, where you just spout a bunch of nonsense and then the opponent doesn't even know where to begin. Like, where do you even start? Because there's just so much chaos and nonsense. It seems like that really is the method by which this administration works is, hey, look at all this mess over here. Oh yeah, I'm doing this performative action over here and saying these things, but then really underhanded, there's other stuff going on, which is exactly what they did. They said, yes, oh no, we rescinded the memo, but then they also are stopping the funding and then out the other side of their mouth saying, oh no, it's still going down. Like, it's crazy. I can't wait to hear the judges' bars, because I feel like federal judges, if they're going to be saying something, it means that it's dire, and they will drop some bars.
So I need to acknowledge the hurt that I feel as a past national forensics / speech and debate kid. First of all, I never heard this made up sounding term, gish galop.
Gish galop.
But I will note, there may have been times when my debate partner and I were like, let's talk fast, and no way they'll get all the points. And I did try to wow the judges with words sometimes. Did they all coherently come together? I plead the fifth on that one. But yeah, I'm feeling a little hurt. Just to recap here for our listeners, 47 claims that federal funding in certain so-called woke areas should be paused, and OMB issues a memo directing other agencies to comply. Almost half the states in the country file a lawsuit because their support of the people in those states depends on this funding. And a federal judge in Rhode Island, who received this case randomly, decided that what's been called the federal freeze must stop and the proper constitutional process is followed. All this happening in, as Martin so accurately pointed out, the smallest state in our country. Martin, does this recap sound right? Did I miss anything?
I think you got it all. I would maybe have added in some more colorful language. Some words that I probably shouldn't be saying on a podcast, but no, I think you got it.
All right, so now let's talk about some of the rationale that Judge McConnell employed in his order. Martin, on our podcast, I often have you read things that are very frustrating, and I'm so sorry for that. But you might like these excerpts. Are you ready?
I think so. Hopefully, I am not too excited in reading some of these, but yeah, let's do it.
Hopefully. Yes, the sugar's coursing through your veins. Sugar rush. All right. Can you start out by reading this language that appears in the very first paragraph of the order?
Sure thing. The executive's categorical freeze of appropriated and obligated funds fundamentally undermines the distinct constitutional roles of each branch of our government. The interaction of the three co-equal branches of government is an intricate, delicate, and sophisticated balance, but it is crucial to our form of constitutional governance. Here, the executive put itself above Congress. It imposed a categorical mandate on the spending of congressionally appropriated and obligated funds without regard to Congress's authority to control spending. For a federal judge, it definitely seems pretty biting. Like, I feel like federal judges, as you talked about, who take the literal and metaphorical weight of their robes seriously, try to remain impartial. As we talked about with the Supreme Court, I think that applies to judges in general. They are supposed to be impartial arbiters of the law. And for him to kind of have this scathing response, something's seriously wrong, or the judge views it was seriously wrong. And I think if I could summarize what he said, it was kind of like, shit gets crazy, scary, spooky. Your argument is hilariously weak. I had to weave in a Kendrick there somewhere. That might have been forced. I feel like he was kind of rhyming a little bit. The categorical freeze of appropriated and obligated, right? The interaction of three branches is intricate, delicate, and sophisticated balance. I feel as it kind of goes with TV off, but the three branches are intricate, delicate, sophisticated, balanced. It kind of goes. But you weren't joking when he was dropping some bars. He actually dropped some bars in this.
So I think that your summary, I think you're right that, among other things, having read and finally finished Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's book, and just listeners, we'll spend more time on that, but you can tell from the sound of my voice how I felt about it anyway. But yes, judges taking this role seriously, they exhibit something known as judicial restraint. And they're like, okay, let me see the evidence. What does your side say? What does your side say? Interesting. Any rebuttal? What are your thoughts? Cross-examination. How many exhibits do you have? And it's not an emotional approach by any means. And yes, I'm not saying that judges who even exhibit this sort of technique are unemotional by any means. They're people too, much like corporations. But yes, I think the judges that take the role seriously and realize how important it is to apply the law fairly, they're not making personal attacks. They're just focused on applying the law. And so in this case with this judge, that seems to me like what he's doing. But the language that he used to basically say, you're out of bounds, bruh, check yourself. love to see it, and I have to say I appreciate it. Can you also read this text that comes from the background section of the order?
Absolutely. We begin by restating the American government principles learned during critical civics education lessons in our youth. Oh boy. It's like, these are the fools who are sitting in the seat of power and they don't even understand how it's supposed to work.
There's also a footnote here. Can you read that text also?
This is what it all comes down to. We may choose to survive as a country by respecting our Constitution, the laws and norms of political and civic behavior, and by educating our children on civics, the rule of law, and what it really means to be an American and what America means. Or we may ignore these things at our, it goes on to say, peril. It's AC versus Raimondo, 494F, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, I was curious if you were going to try to read the gobbledygook that follows the name of a case, and that's why I left it in the outline here. But I just want to point out that, as you may remember, we've gone through what all these numbers and letters associated with a case name and citation mean. And, you know, we've got the volume reference and then the page number, all those things. And in the italic text that says AFF SOM NOM, that is Latin terminology that means formerly under a different name. That was not super necessary to include, but the nerdery was just to point out that Martin read part of a federal case citation and then the case that was used by the judge in his order. Again, the judge that we're talking about today, he cited to another court, essentially, and wanted to prove a point that we have these very well-established Constitution, laws, and norms, and we decided, just approximately hundreds of years ago that we were going to follow them, so it seems like we should keep following them. Martin, what are your impressions of this? Do you have any other thoughts?
I really enjoyed it. I have struggled, I think, of the last 5 or so, maybe more years about what it really means to be an American and what America means. And there's definitely been many moments that it's embarrassing to be an American. Growing up, I think a lot of us had a pride and it meant something to be America, the shiny hill in the city, this beacon of light and hope. As you grow up into adulthood, you realize that maybe some of those things aren't quite true. But it even says in the Declaration of Independence, the preamble, it says, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, which I think most people interpret that as it is a pursuit. It is not, this is perfect, we're good, things are the way they are. It is, hey, we need to be better and we need to continually be better. That's why they say the Constitution is a living, breathing document, is because times change, everything changes, right? That's the only constant. And I love that this judge is reaffirming that. And there have definitely been times where I wish, I feel hopeful that we can reclaim what it means to be American and what America truly means. So yeah, I enjoyed reading that footnote.
Did you sneak a peek at my outline? Because you are very much kind of getting to a point that I wanted to raise. And I think it's really important here to pause and point out, why there's so much pride that we can still have. I have to say that the most moving moment or time that I most recently felt the proudest of being American was actually at a naturalization ceremony where federal judges at the place where I clerked, and I imagine this is the case in most federal courthouses, there's a sort of rotation of judges who preside over the naturalization ceremony, and that's the ceremony where you've cleared every hurdle that's thrown at you, and there are many, to become a citizen, and you get to wave this tiny, tiny American flag. And then one or multiple people are chosen to come up and give a speech. And it's just the most powerful day. And this room is filled with people that look all different ways and their family members are there. And you see people in traditional attire from all different countries. And I'm like, that is the United States, that image. And to see people that are trying so hard. And it's just wild to know that there's folks interested in imposing even more barriers for the people who are trying to get here, trying to stay here, trying to contribute to this rich fabric that makes up our country. So it is challenging for that reason, among many others, to feel proud. But the reason why we keep fighting is because we cannot let go. I mean, this is our home too. This is our country too. My four people, my ancestors helped build this place. This is now my home. I don't have a tribe or a nation that I can call home. This is my home, so I'm not going down without a fight.
Yeah, I love that. It feels like it's also a response to, we hear all these xenophobic people say, if you don't like it, go home or go back to where you came from or all this stuff. But no, this is our home. As a son of immigrants, I was getting goosebumps by just hearing you describe that ceremony. And I just imagine how incredible it is because, there are severe obstacles. There's tons of paperwork. Even if you have the time, the money, the resources, it is a ton of work to have the privilege of citizenship. And I think it's important that we defend this too.
Yes, well said. So the judge goes on in his opinion to point out the reason that court intervention is necessary. And he points to specific evidence in the record that demonstrates that the state is likely to be harmed. That's one of the things that has to be proven for injunctive relief. So, and to break that down a little bit, when someone is requesting an injunction for them ultimately to be able to prove their case and to have the permanent outcome that they're looking for, they have to show that there's a likelihood of harm to the person who's asking for something to be done or not done. Martin, can you read this excerpt from the discussion section of the order?
Yes. The record makes clear that following the OMB directive's issuance, and even before it was set to take effect, many of the states found themselves unable to draw down appropriated and awarded funding because they were completely shut out from accessing federal funding payment portals such as the Payment Management Services, PMS.
Any reactions to this?
That is an unfortunate acronym. to inject some levity. But yeah, I mean, that's crazy. I think that lends credence to why the judge issued the TRO, because the temporary restraining order, because even before it was set to take effect, clearly there was something going on in the background. So they could be saying all that they want to try to appease any response. But it was clear there was a coordinated effort to stop this. And of course, gosh, if you want to talk about what it is to be America, money and money.
Money. I got money. Yes. Music reference.
I got money. Too many. But I mean, yeah, it's wild. Like this is money that was arduously debated, argued, ultimately approved, went through this like rigorous process, and just like that, they take it away.
Yes, I completely agree. And it's distressing because at all points, just as you said, even before the memo took effect, and then while it was seemingly rescinded, and then even when the judge had already issued an order restraining the freeze, at all those points, the states have been unable to receive critical funding to support the well-being of their citizens. And dare I say it, to support and I'm going to quote here, certain unalienable rights that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And by the way, that comes from the Declaration of Independence, not just out of thin air. Each person in these 50 states has these rights. And these states, via long-standing statutes, have the right to this funding. And so the judge points out exactly which of the statutes speak to the point that you raised, Martin, that Congress has the power of the purse. This judge said, get it together. It's Congress, and I appreciate that. And this is just the one example, and there's so many more. These challenges to actions that violate the rule of law have to keep being brought, because without the rule of law, we have no democracy. So, any other thoughts? Martin, I mean, we're not going to be able to dive into the whole order as much as I want to, because we've got to keep our episodes as short as feasible. But, I mean, what do you think about this notion of the separation of powers and these three branches of government, and about the fact that a judge can say, hey, stop doing this, and oh, by the way, people keep doing it? Just, what are your overall impressions?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've kind of talked about it and touched on it, but what I do want to talk about actually is if we're talking Declaration of Independence and high school or elementary civics education, I saw on Reddit not long ago some people quoting the full Declaration of Independence and the things that the founding fathers were calling the king out for, and there were some very relevant points, and maybe we can capture some of those and share them with our listeners, because it's crazy. Centuries later, these things still apply.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. That's something that's necessary for us, and I think it's a really good reference point. We'll share the Reddit post, and we'll also share the source document, because we want you to see those words for yourself. And I just have to emphasize that I highly recommend reading through Judge McConnell's entire order. If you can't get through the whole thing, because I understand people are busy, things are going on, but at least read through the background section where he explains the parts of the Constitution and federal laws that give Congress and Congress only the power to authorize or halt spending. And for those of our listeners who feel shocked and saddened by the president's actions, you might feel like you don't always have the words to explain why things feel so wrong and why this is also unfair. That's why we're here, to explain and to equip you to better understand what's happening. We hope we've done that with this episode. Martin, I like to think that today's episode was a little bit encouraging. In today's times, it feels like there's so many unfair and unjust forces at work, but there are people doing the right thing out there. Unfortunately, even at risk to themselves, because I will note that 47 can be vindictive. There's judges, there's individuals, there's organizations, there's law firms that are under attack simply for saying the Constitution says X. Well, that's not the letter I wanted to use for many reasons, but the Constitution says blank, and you're doing something altogether different. The Constitution requires a certain action that you are not doing. But I'm back on my soapbox again. Is there anything else that's bringing you hope in these times? Is there something that you're doing or reading that our listeners can also check out?
That's a good question. I'd say, honestly, the first thing that came to mind is you and your optimism keeps me hopeful.
Hello, you.
Oh, God.
I just, side note, the show does not give me any commissions, but it popped in my head, so I had to say it.
That is a guilty pleasure of ours that goes back to the beginning of our dating history. I mean, I would say in these trying times, local government matters, and there are ways that you can have an impact on your immediate community through volunteering or even just tuning into local boards or commissions. But yeah, anything else that I'm doing, I don't know that there's a lot that I'm doing that's bringing me hope. But I am reminded of a quote attributed to Mr. Rogers, who I believe he said that it was his mom who told him in times of chaos or trouble, look for the helpers. And I think that's what we were trying to do today is highlight, maybe McConnell's not coming here to save us, but he clearly takes his role seriously. And there are still people who are fighting the good fight. And I think that can be a powerful thing to know that other people are experiencing what you're experiencing. Other people are frustrated with what's going on. And maybe you don't have direct action, but there are ways that you can tune into the right things and look for the light that's out there.
That's very sweet. I can't add anything to that. I thought that was pretty awesome. Martin, can you hit us with the outro?
You got it. Stay tuned for our next episode. In the meantime, you can check us out at Lawyer and Layman Pod on Instagram and Threads, Lawyer and Layman on YouTube and TikTok. If you like the vibe, don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast and share with your friends. Let us know if there are any topics you'd like us to explain. Don't walk around not knowing.